dialogue has been opened between system leaders and the Royal College of Nursing. And in fact, that dialogue has been ongoing throughout the time since the strike was actually announced. And so my understanding is that the safety issues have been dealt with, and it's in everyone's interest that actually the strike is safe for patients and for staff as well, and obviously patients' families. So that seems to have been dealt with. And I suppose in some ways it's actually helpful from the college's point of view to have had some alert that there may have been concerns raised. But in fact, those have been, I think, very squarely responded to.
But how can the strike be safe when clearly we know that nurses help people who are sick? So if they're not there, the NHS is going to be less safe than it was before, isn't it?
Well, there are very strict rules governing the conduct of a strike so that any safety issues are eliminated. And certainly from the point of view of precedent, there was a strike in 2019 in Northern Ireland. I was on the picket lines then because I was president of the Royal College of Nursing at the time, and there were no casualties then. So there's a great deal of rigour goes into this process, and much of it is actually dealt with. I mean, there's national guidelines, but at a very local level, so that, the utmost care is actually taken to ensure that safety is the priority.
What happened in that situation in Northern Ireland? Did the nurses get the settlement that they wanted?
Yes, well, it was quite remarkable because not only did they get a pay increase, because actually nurses in Northern Ireland had fallen quite far behind nurses in other parts of the United Kingdom because there had been, political paralysis in the country. And they, in fact, had, through the strike action, brought the political parties together. So, in fact, the strike actually acted as a catalyst for getting politicians back round the table and getting, government underway at Stormont. So there were some positives that came out of this strike action itself, both on pay and on an agreement to introduce staffing legislation into Northern Ireland. Now, there is staffing legislation in Wales and in Scotland and promised in Northern Ireland, but England is an outlier in that regard. There is no staffing legislation regulating, for example, the numbers of nurses to patients in clinical areas. And that's something which is much needed.
Elsewhere today, there's a report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. It's found the NHS has been treating fewer patients on fewer beds, despite a real terms increase in funding in the last 10 years. It claims rising sickness is behind a fall in productivity. Is the answer for the NHS always more money, or does the NHS need to change? And what would that change and reform look like, do you think?
Well, I think we can look at the broader picture of recovery from COVID, because it seems as if COVID has inflicted quite an enduring blow on the health system. We have increased population health, and what you've been alluding to there, Matt, is this gap between capacity and demand. So basically, despite the fact that there has been increasing money going into the health service, it's not enough to actually give us the reboot post-COVID. And we're still not out of it yet. People are talking about, a fifth wave. Sir Stephen Powis on Sunday was talking about a fifth wave of COVID. It's still really impacting the service and its recovery. And there's OECD evidence that demonstrates that actually the UK's economic recovery from COVID has been And I think that translates as well into the recovery in the health sector. So these two things are actually related, but it's really a kind of mismatch between capacity and demand, a number of beds that we have had in the system. And pre-pandemic, we had the lowest number of beds compared to any other European country, which doesn't give you the kind of buffer zone that you really need when you're dealing with an emergency situation such as COVID produced. So I think that there does need to be some new thinking, fresh thinking in terms of, how do we match capacity and demand?
Dame Anne-Marie Rafferty, former president of the Royal College of Nursing, thanks very much for joining us. Looking ahead to that strike by nurses in England, which is happening tomorrow. PMQs Unpacked is coming at 12 o'clock. Tim Shipman will be here to pause the action. We're already live on the YouTube channel. Hello, if you're on the YouTube channel watching along already. You are literally keen as mustard. So Tim Shipman will be here with that. And in an hour's time, Richard Madeley's going to be here. I'm not sure if he'll still be on the YouTubes or not. And he's going to do the quiz. Up next, though, what's putting you off buying an electric car? We'll do that next on Times Radio.
Cut through the jargon and keep up to date with all the latest news from the world of business and finance every day with Times Radio Business Bulletins with Ford Pro. Maximize your knowledge of all the international business markets with an essential afternoon update featuring unrivaled analysis and insight from Times Radio's financial experts. Times Radio Business Bulletins every day at Drive from 4 with Ford Pro, connected vehicle software and services. Search Ford Pro to find out more.
Times Radio with Matt Chorley.
Afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. Now, electric vehicles are supposed to be the future of low-carbon travel, but apparently there's falling demand for them, which all seems a bit odd given the price of fuel. But here to talk through what's happening and why is Erin Baker from Auto Trader. Hiya, Erin.
Hello.
So talk us through this data then. Demand for, it's down a lot, isn't it, for electric cars?
Yes, it is down a lot. EV share of new car inquiries slipped from 27% in June to just 19% in November. So there has been a slide. I think it's no surprise given the rising energy costs that, electricity is kind of a scary word right now, given the incredible price hikes and questions about when the government price cap will be lifted and what's going to happen then. So families and households are nervous about budgets, and that's had a knock-on effect on those who are thinking about going electric, because, as we know, the sticker price of an electric car is still on average 37% more than its petrol or diesel counterparts. And so the only way to offset that is with these much lower running costs. So people have been thinking, oh God, is electricity going to be more expensive than petrol or diesel? It's not, but that messaging doesn't really seem to be filtering through.
Is there an issue to do with availability as well? We've talked before about, I remember, what do you call it, microchips and things, with a shortage of those. Is it also the case that it's harder to get hold of new electric cars?
It has been to date, because we had this kind of triple whammy. We had problems with Brexit, we had problems with the pandemic and shifting stuff around, which hit the just-in-time procurement process for manufacturing. And then we had, everything else on top of that. So the pandemic, and the superchip shortage. So there's been a lot of challenges, should we say, about supply. But the point now is that actually, for the first time, supply has now overtaken demand, as stock levels have doubled, and that has resulted in a slight softening of prices as well around electric cars.
So actually, are there bargains to be had?
Yeah, there are, and it's really something consumers don't really like to hear, but you've got to sit down with your calculator and do the maths on this, because actually, if you look around, we give an example the other day of, I think it was the Seat Cupra, which is the petrol version, and Seat Born, which is the electric version, and the Cupra Born, and there's about £3,000 price differential there, but actually the electric version, when you then look at electricity being cheaper, works out cheaper overall. So it's about doing the maths. I mean, we calculate at Auto Trader that at the moment, for every 1,000 miles travelled, you're going to be saving about £125 if you're filling your car with electricity as opposed to fuel. And when that price cap lifts on energy, we think, yes, that'll get a squeeze. It might go down to about £80 price differential, but electricity is still going to be cheaper, especially if you're charging at home and can do it on an off-peak tariff overnight.
And that never, that's just talking economics, never mind the environmental impact as well. One last thing, Rose is just texting and saying, electric cars, what puts me off is the products that go into it because it's killing people in other countries, and I object to that, and nobody talks about it.
I imagine so. She's talking about presumably the batteries and the lithium, cobalt, and the nickel. Yeah, there are various issues with that, but they get mined heavily in places that don't have great human rights issues, like Democratic Republic of Congo. But car brands are faced with pulling production out of those and leaving poverty behind them. We're trying to work with human rights organisations inside the country to make conditions better. They're also looking at doing things like, actually, there's a rich lithium scene in Cornwall. Who knew? Maybe we should be opening up mining here, but that's a contentious issue politically. So car brands are aware of these issues and are trying their best to work and solve them where appropriate.
And I suppose there are also implications of if you've got a petrol car and the implications for climate change and poorest countries and all of that as well. Well, it's fascinating. I hadn't realised that the tide had turned, and maybe it is the time to make the full switch. Erin, really good to speak to you. Erin Baker there from Auto Trader on the news that demand for new electric vehicles has halved since the fuel crisis in September 21. So we are down by a third since this spring. It's a bit of good news, isn't it? Even though you can't barely afford to put your Christmas lights on, never mind driving an electric car. Right, coming up, PMQs Unpacked is next. And after that, Richard Madeley's going to be on. Yeah, to find out why he keeps getting into arguments with Mick Lynch, amongst other things. Don't forget, if you want me to say hello to you on Christmas Day, we've got a very special show on Christmas Day. If you'd like me to say hello to you or to someone else who you can't see on Christmas Day, you need to email me, matt@times.radio. Matt@times.radio. Send me your Christmas messages and we'll include it in the not entirely live Christmas show on Christmas Day from 10 till 1. Right, up next is PMQs Unpacked. Listen along on Times Radio. Get on the YouTube channel, Times Radio YouTube channel. It's next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley. This is Times Radio. PMQs Unpacked is next, the last PMQs of this year. First, a look at the main stories this lunchtime. We're told that 3 people have died after a small boat capsized in the English Channel, with 43 others rescued alive. It follows a major operation off the Kent coast involving the Royal and French Navies. Home Secretary Suella Braverman will update MPs on the situation at around 12:30. An 8th person has now been confirmed to have died in a suspected gas explosion at a block of flats in Jersey on Saturday morning. Police have confirmed there's still 1 resident unaccounted for. Food is around 16% more expensive now than it was a year ago, with the average Christmas dinner this time around costing around 9% more. Inflation has dropped from October's peak, though it is still 10.7%. And London Fire Brigade has been placed in special measures. Inspectors have raised concerns over what it calls unacceptable behaviour, including discrimination and bullying. We'll have a full news and sport roundup at 12:30. But now, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio.
Order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And here we are again, one final time. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator from the Sunday Times. How are you?
I'm good. I'm delighted. I share a birthday with Richard Madeley. It's a shame he
Do
couldn't
you?
join us. I think that would have been
Richard
an
Madeley
interesting-
unpacking PMQs.
Could have
Might
been
go
good.
on for a while longer than it does normally. We've come a long way in PMQs this year, haven't we? We began the year with there were no parties, and now look at us.
About to have some parties, hopefully. The first normal Christmas for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, those of us that at number 10 had a drinks to, and we were all looking around slightly bewildered, going, we haven't been here for 3 years. So there's a slight sense of normality returning, and that goes for the politics as well, a little bit. We've got 2 sort of serious leaders who are trying to, stake out their turf ahead of an election in, 18 months, 2 years. And the dynamics feel a bit more like what we grew up doing. You've got a government that's got a lot of problems, an opposition attacking on the substance, making life a little bit uncomfortable on the personality stuff from time to time. But it feels like the game is back to what we recognised when it was Blair and Brown and Cameron and those people, in a way that, the Brexit years were turbulent and odd, and then Boris Johnson created a whole new level of parallel
odd.
reality that and that was his political ability to make people issues bounce off him and his frame things in a slightly different way. But Rishi Sunak's a more conventional Conservative than Boris Johnson was, and Keir Starmer is staking out his terrain in terms that people who work for Tony Blair would recognise too. He's wanted to look competent. He's wanted to look fiscally prudent. He's wanted to get a grip on his own party. He's accomplished all of that. And now it's a straight fight to the election between the two of them. And we've seen over the last few months things getting a bit clearer. I think Starmer's sharpened his act up. Is performing a lot better. And he's got a different Prime Minister not giving him the answers.
Yeah. But it's a slight, if you're Keir Starmer's whole, his main sales pitch was "I'm Mr. Boring," and isn't that nice? But it's quite difficult if
the other fella is too.
No, I missed it last week, so I was away.
Oh, I know. Welcome back.
What were the drinks and nibbles like at number 10 last week?
There were. I was on the mulled wine, which was
good,
warming and pleasant. I'm told the white was an atrocity, and in fact, someone from number 10 went down with quite a bad stomach bug. I wasn't that very evening. Unclear if the white wine was responsible, but I'm told it was warm and unpalatable.
Well, just warm yet unpalatable. That's PMQs for you. Right. Well, that's probably enough of that. People are doing their lunch. Get on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Get on YouTube. Search Times Radio. You can see Tim. Somebody's asking if it's cold in the studio. Tim, you're not staying. He's still got his very smart jacket on. Right, here we go then. This is the last PMQs of 2022. Lots of Keir Starmer to ask the Prime Minister about. Let's go live to the House of Commons. It's question number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister? Our prayers go out to those who capsized in the freezing waters of the Channel last night. It's a reminder that the criminal gangs running those routes put the lives of the desperate at risk and profit from their misery. They must be broken up and brought to justice. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow will be the first ever nationwide nurses' strike. All the Prime Minister has to do to stop that is to open the door and discuss pay with them. If he did, the whole country would breathe a sigh of relief. Why won't he?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have consistently spoken to all the unions involved in all the pay disputes that there are. But I am glad he's raised our nurses because they do incredible work, and it's worth putting on record. It's worth putting on record what exactly we have done for our nurses. Last year, when everyone else in the public sector had a public sector pay freeze, the nurses received a 3% pay rise. When the RCN asked for more in-work training, we gave every nurse and midwife a £1,000 training budget. And when they asked for nurses' bursaries, we made sure that every nursing student received a £5,000 grant. That's because we do work constructively, and we will continue to back our nurses.
It's interesting there that Keir Starmer, while reflecting on what's happened in the Channel, choosing not to go on that as an issue, presumably because they went through it all literally yesterday afternoon with Rishi Sunak's plans.
Yeah, that's right. But also it's tricky terrain for both of them. And, I think while I wouldn't necessarily have expected Starmer to go on it, I think it will be Sunak whose hands are tied a bit because he would have hoped to reply to a lot of stuff that Starmer was going to ask him today with, look at me, I'm being tough on migrants. And when you've got boats capsizing in the Channel, that sting is rather taken out of that. But telling also that Starmer talked about breaking up the criminal gangs rather than stopping the people coming. And that's going to be, the difference between the two parties on the issue of small boats. The Tories still think that they're closer to the public on that one than the Labour Party, but I don't think Sunak's going to have much of an opportunity to make that point today.
Interesting that Keir Starmer going on the nurses' strike, saying that the only thing they need to do is open the door and talk to them. I mean, they do then have to settle in some way. And crucially, Labour won't say what they would.
No, I'm not
settle on either.
surprised. Well, I mean, the Shadow Health Secretary gave a very interesting interview.
Wes
Streeting at the weekend, where he sort of said, I've had problems with the NHS. I'm waiting for a cancer all clear, which I've not had because the test results haven't come back. It's all very chaotic. But he's also said, he had a bit of a pop at some of the NHS leadership and said, we're offering you more staff. And that, on the basis of getting that, you're going to need to improve the way you do things. And making the point that even he's had grief from them as a result of that.
Yeah.
So you've got a Labour Party that's acknowledging problems with the NHS, which it doesn't always do. And interesting that Starmer's the one bringing up strikes, because, again, that's been one of Sunak's sort of comeback arguments, that Labour's in the pocket of the unions. I mean, what neither of them mentioned, which I find slightly curious, and I would have thought Rishi Sunak would have made this point. Maybe he will when he's inevitably asked another few questions about it. But the pay demand is 19%.
Yeah.
There aren't many people in the private sector getting 19% this year.
Although actually at the weekend the RCN said, "Oh no, that's only our opening offer," realising they might have started a bit, they might have gone a bit high. They might have gone a bit high. Well, Rishi Sunak carefully laying out that. Actually, in a way, we haven't really heard a lot from ministers. The detail of what they've done before. They did have pay rises when the rest of the public sector was frozen, extra training, extra bursaries and so on.
And in a sense, what Sunak can do that Boris Johnson probably couldn't, having, done clap for carers and just chuck money at the NHS. Sunak has always said we need to be honest about the trade-offs here.
Yeah.
And he will be able, presumably, to make the argument that if you put up public sector pay too much, that then leads to inflation going rampant again. And if you look at the figures this morning, inflation has just dipped a little.
Yeah.
And the Tories hope that that will be the story of the first 6 months of next year, that gradually comes down and puts them in a position where they can start to, make some more political... They might have a little bit of money to spend, and they can do some more, what they would see as more conservative politics, some more conservative economics. It might allow for easing some taxes somewhere. So, again, if you put all this money into public sector pay, that will... that gain is lost.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see if he tries to make a sort of macroeconomic argument.
Sort of taking a step back from that. Someone on the YouTube channel, usually listen on the Times Radio app, I thought I'd join you for the full sensory experience on YouTube. Wonderful to see that even in full HD, Parliament's still a chaotic Punch and Judy show. I mean, it's quite calm compared to how it has been before, unless it was referring to you and I. Let's go back to House of Commons. This is question number 2 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, nurses going on strike is a badge of shame for this government. Instead of showing leadership, he's playing games with people's health. And there is a human cost. Alex from Chester has been waiting for a gallbladder operation for nearly 6 months. He's in so much pain, he's been off school since then. His operation has already been cancelled twice. His mum, who I spoke to this morning, is worried sick. When she heard that strikes could be called off, she was massively relieved. She's desperate for the Prime Minister to resolve this. All he needs to do is simply meet the nurses. Now, Alex's mum is listening to this. She doesn't want to hear him blaming everybody else. She doesn't want his usual ducking of the question. She's tuned in now because she wants him to explain what is he going to do to resolve the nursing strike.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not just Alex. There are millions of others across this country, Alex and Mark, millions of others who will have their healthcare disrupted because of the strike. Now, the honourable gentleman says to get round the table, but we all know what that means, Mr. Speaker. That is just simply a political formula for avoiding taking a position on this issue. If he thinks the strikes are wrong, he should say so. If he thinks it's right that pay demands of 19% are met, then he should say so. What's weak, Mr. Speaker, is he's not strong enough to stand up to the union.
If only you had your bell.
There we are. As you predicted, the 19% thing, and the fact that the Labour Party won't commit to that.
Quite. And interesting there that Sunak has been under relentless attack from Labour for probably the last 4 Prime Minister's questions in a row for being weak. And now he's trying to turn it back on Starmer, which is an interesting way of dealing with something where, you've got a perceived problem. You can attack on the same subject and hope to neutralise it.
Flip it round, yeah. But I'm not sure apart from some stronger language, a badge of shame, playing games with people's lives, I'm not sure we got very far. So
no, and there is another argument in Sunak's locker that, you've now got people within the NHS turning on the nurses. The chief nursing officer has said that they're in danger of damaging people's health, and so is the head of cancer care. I wonder if we'll be hearing about them in due course. But so far, I'd say this was a closer score draw than perhaps Starmer would have hoped after 2 questions.
But it's interesting as well that the split on this was from polling last week from YouGov specifically on the question of nurses. 46% of people blame the government, 17% blame the unions, and 25% said they're both equally to blame. But amongst those voting Labour, 75% blame the government compared to only 11% of Conservatives. So it's but obviously there's a lot more of those Labour people because they're that much further ahead in the polls. So that's the divide, I suppose. Let's see if Keir Starmer can build on that. It's question number 3.
Mr. Speaker, in 12 hours' time, there's a nurses' strike. All he needs to do is meet the nurses. His inaction speaks volumes. As ever with this Prime Minister, it's Tory politics first, patience second. We've never seen a nurses' strike like this before. They've been forced into it because the government has broken the health system. Ask anyone in the NHS. They will tell you they don't have enough staff. 133,000 vacancies. And there's an obvious solution. Scrap the non-dom status and use the money to bring through the next generation of doctors.
Weekly
and
mention
nurses.
of non-doms there.
That's what Labour would do. Why hasn't he got the guts to do it?
Mr. Speaker, we're already investing billions more in the NHS. We're already hiring thousands more doctors and nurses. But he asked about backlog. He asked about backlogs and the waiting times in the NHS. And yes, what he always fails to acknowledge is the impact that COVID did, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're facing pressures. But we do have a plan. Not just more money, not just more doctors and nurses, new diagnostic centres carrying out millions of checks and scans, new surgical hubs delivering more elective surgery. But if we'd listened to him, Mr. Speaker, the backlog would still be growing, and that's because we'd still be in lockdown.
We'd still be what now? We'd still be in lockdown now. That was
vintage Boris Johnson era baiting.
Once again, we've got slightly in the PMQs groove, haven't we?
Yes,
new topic, 2 or 3 questions in. It's non-doms. It's you'd have kept us in the European Medicines Agency. We didn't quite go there, but we were still in lockdown.
Yeah, I think the lockdown is an argument a bit like the one blaming Starmer for Jeremy Corbyn years down the track that I don't think essentially cuts through in a credible way with the public. He's right to talk about some of the stuff that they've been doing and wanting to do. I'm surprised he hasn't gone back to Starmer on what do you actually think of this? I know the speaker tends to get cross if the Prime Minister asks questions, but if he just kept saying, would you give them 19%? Yes, exactly. And also, this whole argument about, what Ed Miliband, back when there were strikes, famously did that. For those of you at home near a computer, just go on to, when you finish with us on YouTube, have a look at Ed Miliband doing his statement about strikes.
Around the table.
These strikes are wrong, he kept saying. And he did it
put our differences to one side and get back around the table. Yeah. Again, and he just did it again and again.
Exactly. He was asked about 9 questions and the answer just kept coming literally identical because they didn't want to move an inch off this agreed line. And the same seems to be the case for Starmer. He gets the chance to attack because it's PMQs, but
sitting right next to Keir Starmer is Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, who is trying to keep an iron-like grip on spending commitments by the Labour Party. And the last thing she wants
Starmer sort of flexes a leg, you might see might literally see a hand come out and
biro in the thigh. Because it was 28 billion pounds or something. If everyone in the public sector got an inflation beating.
It's quite a lot of money.
It's quite a lot of money. Right, here we go. Then go back. Let's see how many more it is Christmas, so maybe that's why we're getting repeats. Let's go back to question number 4 from Keir Starmer.
As As usual, Mr. Speaker, he tries to blame everyone else. His department commissioned a report into the NHS which reported on Monday. That report said we've had 10 years of managed decline. It was not COVID. Responsibility is sitting right there. And the reason he can't choose nurses over non-doms is because he's too weak to stand up to the tax avoiders. For 12 years, they haven't trained enough doctors and nurses. So we have the absurd situation of the NHS spending billions on agency workers to fill the gap. Why should the country have to put up with money that should be spent treating patients being wasted plugging gaps instead?
Mr. Speaker, let me tell the honourable gentleman what we are doing. We are actually listening to the independent pay review bodies. They want to undermine them. We've offered a fair pay deal. They can't even decide on a number amongst themselves. We're actually protecting the public. They're protecting their paymasters, Mr. Speaker. For working people in this country, it's Labour's nightmare before Christmas.
Has he got his notes muddled up?
I think we should just pause, have a moment of silence.
A moment of silence and personal reflection on how badly that joke dropped out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, it must be a real nightmare for Keir Starmer being only now 20 points ahead in the polls.
Yes. Look, I mean, Sunak had a good binary build-up to that.
Yeah.
With, you know, we're protecting the public, you're protecting your paymasters. You know, we've offered them something, you won't tell us how much it is. But yes, he then spoilt it all with the nightmare before Christmas. I mean, it is the nightmare before Christmas, but to claim at this point that it's Labour's nightmare seems a little bit optimistic for a Prime Minister whose party have been in power for 12 years.
And actually, the big critic, you know, if anyone's been paying any attention to Labour's relationship with the unions, is they've threatened to take away money. They don't think Keir Starmer's been hard enough on them. He's sacked people who joined picket lines. It's much hard. He doesn't look like a sort of burning brazier union baron hugger.
No, and they've been, you know, the Tories are sort of, I think Angela Rayner's been saying Mick Lynch, the RMT guy, is a reasonable man. I think you can, if they align too closely with the rail unions, they might have more problems than, you know, it's a pretty cost-free enterprise for a Labour Party to align itself with the nurses.
Yeah. Well, there we are. Let's see. Still got two more questions to go. Who knows how bad the jokes might get? Let's go back to the House of Commons then. It's PMQs Unpacked. It's question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer, there he goes again, pretending everything is fine. Try telling that to those on waiting lists or those that can't afford to pay for a next-day GP appointment. After 12 years of Tory failure, winter has arrived for our public services. And we've got a Prime Minister who has curled up in a ball and gone into hibernation.
That's also quite bad.
That's quite bad. On behalf of patients or nurses or everyone who wants these strikes called off, then surely the whole country is entitled to ask, what is the point of him and what is the point of the government he's supposed to be leading?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about COVID not having an impact. Ambulance waiting times for Category 1 ambulance waiting times in February of 2020 were actually completely on target, Mr. Speaker. COVID has an impact, and that's why, as the Chief Executive of the NHS has acknowledged, this government is serious about its commitment to prioritise the NHS. But, Mr. Speaker, let's just have a look at the NHS in Labour-run Wales, shall we? The worst A&E times in the country, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Okay, well,
curled up in a ball and got into hibernation was pretty bad.
I think it's it's 1-1 now.
1-1 on the bad pre-planned jokes. Rishi Sunak boasting that it's been two and a half, 3 years since they met the A&E ambulance Category 1 targets. Is probably not the boast that he might hope to be. However, him ending there on the point about the NHS in Wales, where we were discussing earlier, midwives are going on strike. In Scotland, they've just averted a strike, I think, amongst nurses by settling with the unions. But the NHS in Scotland is not in a great way. This cuts across all parties, doesn't it?
It does, really. I mean, when the budget was coming out and, they were cutting here, there and everywhere, but still chucking money at the NHS, one of my friends said, we're now a health service with a country attached to it. And frankly, you could spend almost the entire national income on the health service and still not have it, achieving what people would hope that it would. And it's a difficult area to make savings in. It's a difficult area to justify not pouring as much money into it as you possibly can. But clearly COVID has had an impact. What Sunak's not really explaining there is why a lot of people will think, well, it's a couple of years after COVID now, and why is that stopping an ambulance getting people there on time? I mean, the short answer is there's a lot of people in hospital who haven't had the treatment they deserve, which means that they're stuck there, which means there aren't any beds. So when ambulances arrive, they can't put people into the hospital quickly enough and go out and do the next job. But he's not really sort of spelling that out. It doesn't intrinsically seem like, on the face of it, a sensible argument that, COVID's still having an impact on sort of day-to-day goings on. Clearly, it killed a lot of people and it's put back a lot of people's treatment. But that actually has an impact, on health. It has an impact on employment as well, because there's a lot of people sitting idle who wouldn't be, because they haven't had, whatever surgery it was that they needed.
And so it goes on and on. Phil's just been in touch with Devon. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that both Starmer and Wes Streeting have said 19% is unaffordable, which I think we did reflect that. But the point is they haven't said what is affordable or what they would settle on. And even if it was 10%, matching in today's inflation rate, that's still an awful lot of money because there are an awful lot of nurses.
Yes.
And then you get every other public sector worker would want the same because if you clap you clap the nurses, you clap the teachers, and so it goes on.
And it's a very politicised area, health. It's always been Labour's best sort of weapon to attack the Tories with, and that to a degree has made it difficult to get cross-party kind of consensus on how you go about dealing with this. But the other interesting thing from Sunak, immediately talking about Wales and A&E times there, is that is wildly popular with his own backbenchers who say, look at you lot, Labour, you run Wales and it's always a mess.
We're a mess, but so are you.
So are you.
And then up there.
And that sort of cheers them up.
Yeah.
And, as ever at Prime Minister's Questions, some of it is for the voter out there, some of it is for the sort of cognoscenti like us to sort of mark them as they go forward. But a lot of it is about the people sitting behind them and whether they're leaving for their Christmas break thinking that bloke's doing all right, actually, we'll give him a bit more time, or thinking he's, getting his backside handed to him on a weekly basis. And I would say on this week, he's been a bit more sure-footed in his replies than he has been probably for the last 2 weeks.
And actually, it's one of those things, because he's not been doing it, to be fair to him, he's only just overtaken Liz Truss. He's not been doing it for
Monday,
that long. Yeah. And so as a result, you build up this sort of well of knowledge and you become more confident.
He's still got, 2.5 months to go before he moves up to being the third shortest serving
He's
Prime
overtaken
Minister.
George Canning.
George Canning, 119 days.
Yeah. One for the nerds there. Right, let's see how this all winds up. Are we going to get non-doms? Are we going to get nurses? Are we going to get... please, let's get for old time's sake, a mention of Jeremy Corbyn. Let's go back to the House of Commons. It's question number 6 from Keir Starmer.
Under the last Labour government, we had fair pay for nurses and no strikes. So I won't be taking lectures from him about that.
Order.
Oh, Lindsay Hoyle.
You promised to behave. Don't give me a Christmas present you won't want. Come on, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is our final PMQs of the year. So I hope you will Oh, really? I hope you will... Mr. Speaker, what I was going to say was I hope you will pass on all of our thanks, at least on this side, to all those who kept our House and our democracy working. Yeah. And I want to finish this year thinking about our friends in Ukraine. As a result of Putin's barbaric assault on their freedom, millions will spend Christmas in sub-zero temperatures without heating, electricity or hot water. Their suffering is unimaginable, but their bravery is awe-inspiring. So will the Prime Minister join me in saying that whatever other difficulties and disagreements we have across this dispatch box, we are and will remain united in our unwavering support for Ukraine's freedom, its liberty and its victory?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I join with the honourable gentleman in thanking and paying tribute to all the staff of the House for the fantastic work that they do to support all of us. And I appreciate his comments on Ukraine. It has been a point of incredible unity across this House and indeed the country, something that we can all be proud of in our country, that we have stood behind Ukraine at its hour of need. And as I said yesterday, this Christmas, many families will be laying an extra place at their Christmas table, and that speaks to the generosity and compassion of our nation, and long may that continue.
Oh, an outbreak of cheery, festive consensus at the end. Quite smart. I mean, if you're
Starmer.
Very cynical, very smart by Starmer. Completely change the subject. Go for something you can't. And then whatever pre-planned.
Yeah. No clip for Rishi.
No clip for Rishi at the end of the news because he couldn't do, presumably, his attack on you propped up Jeremy Corbyn and your European Medicines Agency. We'd still be in lockdown now. None of that. Really smart politics by Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and to go on Ukraine, you were saying what we've come a long way in a year. We've come a long way in a couple of years, really. Unimaginable that Corbyn would have made comments like that about unity or about involvement in a foreign war, and emblematic of where Starmer has positioned the Labour Party. So clever in a range of ways, I think.
So as we head into Christmas, then it's our last time that we'll be together this year, Tim. I assume. Yeah,
I didn't get invited on the cruise, Matt. So chances to bond further were denied to me.
I think it was like pilots. Only one of us could be abroad at any one time for safety reasons. Who going into Christmas? Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer will be the happiest.
Oh, Starmer's much happier than Sunak, no question about that. But Sunak's still alive, and as he's now lasted longer than Liz Truss. And more importantly, he's in a much better position than Liz Truss was at any point in her premiership. He has stopped the bleeding. He's sort of stabilised things. He's taken it down, the temperature down a notch or two, and he's bought himself a bit of time. I mentioned it earlier. There was no mention of it at PMQs, but if inflation has topped out now and is going to begin to fall, then that won't have an immediate effect on people's lives, because all that means is that things get more expensive slightly slower than they were doing. But in terms of, the big picture, the Tories will be able to start weaving a narrative next year that things are getting a bit better, that we've all been in it and suffered the pain, and now there might be something politically to show for it. His big challenge is to survive to the local elections and get through those without Boris Johnson re-emerging as a credible threat to his leadership. And if he can get through that, then, he's probably going to still be there at the general election. But Starmer, began the year, not that far ahead, and has had a good year. He found it quite difficult to attack Boris Johnson. He didn't quite know which way to come at him a lot of the time. Boris Johnson made it very easy for him with Partygate and, some of the other gaffes and mistakes over the handling of some of those sleaze issues. And, he's seen off two prime ministers. He's got his party in a decent position who, from time to time, are able to lead the way, both on the economy and on wider policy. And his party's now pretty united behind him. So, Starmer's had a very good year, and Sunak has gone from being the golden child at the start of the year to making a mess of things in his spring budget, to his wife being embarrassed over non-domery, being humiliatingly defeated by Liz Truss, and then bouncing straight back and making so far a sort of decent grown-up fist to being prime minister. He's had a pretty reasonable year as well, but he's behind and he knows it, and there are still questions in Tory ranks about whether he's got the dynamism to turn them around. There aren't so many people talking about Starmer's dynamism now, because it's not what's required. It's looking like a prime minister, and so far he's beginning to look like he knows how to sort of answer those questions.
Tim Shipman, stay there, because I'm sorry to break the news. We don't have Ian Blackford.
Oh, I know. Well, we didn't have Ian Blackford last week. This is what you missed. It was the great historic occasion. Stephen Flynn. He was quite the edgy customer. I'll miss the humble crofter.
The humble crofter is off humbly crofting. So we'll get Stephen Flynn next and the best of the rest. And then we're going to be joined live by Richard Madeley, who's going to do the quiz. And you don't get that anywhere else. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio. Let's get some news now from Cara Bentley.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. 4 people are now confirmed to have died after a small boat got into difficulty in the English Channel early this morning. A government spokesman has described it as a truly tragic incident with 43 people rescued. The Royal Navy, French Navy, Coast Guard and RNLI were all involved in the rescue operation off the coast of Dover. During Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak paid tribute.
I'm sure the whole House will share my sorrow at the capsizing of a small boat in the Channel in the early hours of this morning and the tragic loss of human life. Our hearts go out to all those affected and our tributes to those involved in the extensive rescue operation.
The Labour leader has criticised the Prime Minister for not stopping the nurses' strike due to take place tomorrow. Sir Keir Starmer said the industrial action by the Royal College of Nursing was a badge of shame.
All he needs to do is meet the nurses. His inaction speaks volumes. As ever with this Prime Minister, it's Tory politics first, patience second. We've never seen a nurses' strike like this before. They've been forced into it because the government has broken the health system. Ask anyone in the NHS. They will tell you they don't have enough staff.
The Prime Minister responded by criticising Sir Keir's call to get round the table as a way of avoiding stepping off the fence himself.
That is just simply a political formula for avoiding taking a position on this issue. If he thinks the strikes are wrong, he should say so. If he thinks it's right that pay demands of 19% are met, then he should say so.
A few freezing fog patches in central and southern areas, otherwise sunny spells with wintry showers affecting northern and later eastern coasts. Windy in the far north. Most places are 1 or 0 degrees Celsius, slightly warmer on the south coast. Toby Gillis has the sport.
Morocco's national airline has apologised after it cancelled all flights carrying fans to tonight's World Cup semi-final with France in Qatar. Hundreds had booked onto the specially chartered flights to go and watch their side become the first African nation to compete for a place in the tournament's final. Royal Air Maroc says it was forced into the move by new restrictions put in place by Qatar, but we don't know what those are. The match itself is described in the Times today as a grudge match between a former colonial power and its one-time protectorate, with concerns, particularly in Paris, of violent clashes between the two sets of supporters. The Sunday Times Europe editor, Peter Conradi, says there's a lot of potential for that.
There are something like 1.5 million people of Moroccan origin who live in France. Some of those are sort of first-generation immigrants. I think more of them are people whose parents came over. You know, it's a very similar relationship, I suppose, to people from the Caribbean in Britain or from India or Pakistan and whatever. So, you know, there are a lot of divided loyalties.
The winner of Morocco against France will play Argentina in Sunday's final after they beat Croatia 3-0 last night. And World Rugby, the sport's international governing body, has referred the decision of its own vice-chairman to suspend himself to its independent ethics officer. Bernard Laporte made the call yesterday after being handed a suspended 2-year prison sentence for corruption. He's also been banned from holding any position in the sport for that time, pending an appeal. World Rugby says it feels necessary to investigate Laporte's position to ensure they stick to their own integrity code. You can read more on these stories on the Times website or app.
This is Times Radio.
Connected Ford commercial vehicles delivered. Telematics data and live vehicle health updates delivered. Charging solutions at home, depot or on the road delivered. Financing plans for business vehicles delivered. Vehicle maintenance, you guessed it, delivered. Ford Pro delivers end-to-end commercial fleet solutions to help you maximise vehicle uptime and save you time. Ford Pro, driving productivity. Search Ford Pro.
Today's tale begins the night the internet went down at the Smith family.
Son?
The dad watched on Powerless as his son aged before his eyes.
The game has been loading forever.
Save yourself from broadband nightmares. Get BT's unbreakable hybrid broadband backed up by EE, the UK's best network. Search BT Hybrid Broadband. 88% UK availability. 4G connection takes up to 175 seconds. Best for mobile network performance. Verify at ee.co.uk/claims.
Matt Chorley, mid-morning on Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you, it's Matt Chorley. We've just done PMQs Unpacked, the final exchange between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. But, as we always do, we'll bring you the best of the West. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times, is still here. And for the first time for me, because I never mentioned I wasn't here last week, no Ian Blackford. Sad times. Instead, we've got the new SNP leader in Westminster, Stephen Flynn.
I wish to join with the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition in extending my party's thoughts to all of those involved in the terrible tragedy in the Channel this morning. Mr. Speaker, thanks to positive and proactive negotiations between the Scottish Government and Unite and Unison health unions, a pay settlement has been reached and strike action averted. By stark contrast, the UK Health Secretary appears completely unwilling to negotiate with unions on pay, and strike action is very much still on the table. So may I ask the Prime Minister, when will he see the error of his ways and follow the Scottish Government's lead?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the UK Government was able to provide £1.5 billion in extra funding to the Scottish Government for public services. The Health Secretary and other ministers have engaged fully, not just with the unions, but with an independent pay-setting process, which takes the politics out of the process and ensures that we can meet those independent requirements with a fair pay deal.
Here we are. We were talking about that earlier on, the fact that Scotland had averted the nurses' strike, and Stephen Flynn trying to make some political capital from it.
And Sunak responding with the sort of unionist argument, well, you're giving them the money we've given you, so bravo for the union.
Everyone's happy. Everyone's done their bit.
Yep.
Right, let's go back to the House of Commons now. This is a question from the Labour MP, Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This year the Tory party has given us 5 education secretaries, 4 chancellors, 3 prime ministers, 2 leadership coups. And Mr. Speaker, the Partridges had to sell the pear tree to pay the gas.
Oh, that's better.
It's definitely the winner.
The best joke we've had
Speaker,
today.
isn't it the case that after a year of Tory chaos, incompetence and self-indulgence, the best Christmas present the Prime Minister could give to the British people is a general election?
Mr. Speaker, they're happier with that than before, Mr. Speaker. But all I'd say, when it comes to what the British people need this Christmas, Mr. Speaker, in order to ease the disruption on their lives, the best thing that the party opposite could do is tell their union bosses to call off these damaging strikes.
There we go. Everyone's happy. Decent joke from Angela Eagle.
I mean, yeah, that's proper, isn't it? You know, and in fact, it was so proper that I've had about 6 different people send it to me even as we were listening.
What's slightly annoying about it is I was writing a script for something for next week, and it had almost the same gag in it, so I shall have to have a revisit.
I'm sure you can make it even
How's
funnier.
your review of 2022 coming along?
Yeah, need to get on with that, really.
When will we see that? Is that this week or next week?
There's going to be, I think. Well, it won't be this week, but there'll be. There'll be. I'm working on something that's a sort of a bit of an essay, and I'm also working on something that's much more light-hearted.
So when do we see just Shipman Awards?
I would think one for Christmas and one for New Year.
Very good. Very good. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Tim Shipman, throughout 2022.
What a year we've had.
Who knows what next year will bring?
I hope it just brings less. That's all I would say. Just slightly less.
Just dial it down slightly less. David's been in touch to point out that the Times Radio camera operator appears to be becoming slightly unwell. There's been lots of zooming in and out going on over there.
You don't want that.
You don't want to, yeah.
I'm not a face for HD.
Keep your distance. Anyway, but we are going to stay on the YouTubes, aren't we? I think we're staying on the YouTubes for Richard Madeley. Richard Madeley's going to be here in a minute, and then he's going to do the quiz. There's been a vote and everything. It's all happening. Go on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Merry Christmas to Tim Shipman. Up next, Richard Madeley will be here to tell us what it's like having a row with Mick Lynch, and then he's going to do the quiz. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Jane Garvey and Fee Glover on Times Radio.
It's Wellness Wednesday. We'll do something healthy and we'll ask an urgent question, which is, how do NDAs work? And our big guest is Teresa Weiler. We'll talk about how she felt when she found out her birth parents were siblings.
And Katie Prescott brings all the latest from the tech world. That slot is always eyebrow raising. If my eyebrows are any higher, they'll be hair clips.
Jane Garvey and Fee Glover this afternoon from 3 on Times Radio.
It's Christmas, which every elf and Asda know is the best day in the whole wide world. So celebrate with our 4-hour sumptuously slow-cooked gammon, glazed with sweet sugar plums and an irresistible spiced brulee crumb.
I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it.
And it serves 10 for just £15. Have your elf a Merry Christmas at Asda. Tested and approved by the Good Housekeeping Institute 2022. 1.365 kilograms. Selected Asda stores while stocks last.
On digital radio, on the web, and via the Times Radio app. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Good afternoon. Nice to have you with us, Matt Chorley, on Times Radio. Don't forget, tomorrow night we are recording our end-of-year quiz, Politics Without the Boring quiz, only available to Times subscribers. You can't get tickets now anyway, but if you do want to get tickets to our future events, then you need to become a subscriber, and you get access then to Times Plus, which is our sort of loyalty area. You get offers, discounts, competitions, events. You can win a trip to Brazil, or one of 20 sets of the Times Book of the Year. Anyway, and you get 40% off Prosecco. Blimey. Definitely worth signing up. Anyway, you know what to do. Go to thetimes.co.uk, and once you've all subscribed, just go to Times Plus. Well, we'll speak to Richard Madeley in just a moment. But from the House of Commons, the Home Secretary, Swallow Braverman, has just been making a statement following the tragedy in the Channel this morning. The Home Secretary confirming that 4 people now have lost their lives.
Crossing the Channel in unseaworthy vessels is a lethally dangerous endeavour. It is for this reason, above all, that we are working so hard to destroy the business model of the people smugglers, evil, organised criminals who treat human beings as cargo. As the Prime Minister told the House only yesterday, it is not cruel or unkind to want to break the stranglehold of the criminal gangs who trade in human misery and who exploit our system and our laws. He was right. This morning's tragedy, like the loss of 27 people on 1 November day last year, is the most sobering reminder possible of why we have to end these crossings.
That's Swallow Braverman addressing the House of Commons today. And as and when there are updates on the situation in the Channel, we'll of course bring it to you here on Times Radio. Mariella Foster was here from 1 o'clock today, speaking to, amongst others, Gwen Hines, the Chief Executive of Save the Children. They'll no doubt reflect on events in the Channel. From 3 o'clock today, Jane Garvey and Fee Glover. They are an extraordinary story. Their main interview today. 64-year-old Teresa Weiler opening up about how she found out her birth parents were siblings. Extraordinary story, that. From 5 o'clock today, Times Radio Drive with John Pienaar. And then Pienaar and Friends from 7. He's got John Stevens from the Daily Mirror and Laura Spirit from Times Red Box chewing over the day's news. Kate Borsay is here from 8 o'clock tonight. She'll probably eat the last of my mince pies. She's got the evening edition. And then Cal Walker is here from 10, taking a look at tomorrow's papers as they come in. Now, though, he's one of the most recognisable daytime TV broadcasters. He's challenged Bill Clinton on shoplifting, Tony Blair on weapons of mass destruction. And he's still at it now. After decades on a screen, Richard Madeley still giving political figures a hard time.
Well, we're not targeting Christmas. It isn't Christmas yet, Richard. I don't know when your Christmas starts, but mine starts on Christmas Eve. So we are striking at this time because we've not got a settlement.
Commercial Christmas starts in December. You know that perfectly well. You're being disingenuous.
It's not disingenuous, is it?
It is disingenuous. Of course it is.
Well, if you let me finish
commercial Christmas does not start on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve is when people shut early. Don't be ridiculous.
Richard, you're just talking to yourself.
Commercial Christmas starts at the end of November and early December, and that's when people make their money, and you are depriving them of their income. That's the point.
Right. Have you finished then?
He hadn't, and it went on for quite a while. Needless to say, soon afterwards, Richard Madeley was trending on Twitter. And I'm delighted to say that Richard joins me now. Afternoon, Richard.
I only have to cough and spit in the wrong direction on Good Morning Britain to trend on Twitter, so it's no big, it's no big deal.
We will come on to that. How did you? Because I think you've interviewed Mick Lynch before. Did you find in that exchange on Good Morning Britain yesterday? Is he feeling the heat a little bit?
Definitely, yeah. There's a big change in him. I think I've interviewed him 3 times now, a couple of times live in studio, which to be fair, is easier on both sides because you're in the same space and you can see each other. To be fair to Mick Lynch, like all our sort of down-the-line interviews like that, he would have been looking at the lens of a camera. He couldn't see me, whereas I can see him. So I have a slight technical advantage, I suppose, and he's at a slight disadvantage. But yes, he's been measured and controlled and come across as quite reasonable, I think, in a lot of the media interviews that he's done to date. Yesterday, well, we know what happened on the Today programme with Michelle Husseini. He accused me of ranting. My God, did he go into a rant, accusing the BBC and Radio 4 of basically being sort of the running dogs of the right-wing press. It was extraordinary. And that was a very lengthy rant. With me, and I think our interview came first, I could tell straight away that he wasn't his normal self. He looked a bit rattled. Now, maybe that's because I think about a third of his union members want to settle this dispute. So the big majority of support he had for it is diminishing. And also, as I put to him, I mean, we actually ran a clip from his last appearance on Good Morning Britain about 2.5 weeks ago, when he gave me and Susanna Reid, my co-presenter then, an unequivocal guarantee that there would not be strike action over the Christmas period. He said that on camera. So we played that to him at the top of the interview, which you didn't hear just then.
Yeah.
And I think that threw him.
Yeah.
And I think where he laid himself open to a sort of a strong, not counterattack, but counter questioning, which what I'm there to do, was when he said that, I'm sorry, Richard, but in my book, Christmas doesn't begin until Christmas Eve, so these aren't Christmas strikes. And that was a spectacularly stupid thing to say. And I'm sure afterwards he kicked himself for saying it because it was ridiculous. I mean, it was just absurd. And that was what I was holding him up for. I mean, you've obviously, quite understandably, you've edited down the exchange. But what I was trying to do was to hold him to that statement and to put it to him that it was nonsensical. That Christmas, actually, in this country, begins mid-November, never mind the beginning of December.
Everyone's making those changes. I mean, we would probably normally come to London this weekend and go out for a meal or a show or whatever, and we just won't do that because of the trains. Richard, I was looking this up. You first started as a journalist at the age of 19, which I think that's the same age as I was.
No, I was 16.
You're 16?
Yeah, I'd done what we called O-levels in those days.
Yeah.
And I wrote to the local paper because my dad had been a newspaper journalist. He was then a press officer for Ford. So I knew a bit about it and I knew I wanted to do it. So I wrote to the local paper in Brentwood in Essex and just asked if I could have what today we'd call work experience.
Yeah.
And the editor wrote back and told me to sort of piss off, basically, and said, pardon my French.
The unlikely event anyone is offended, we apologise.
Yeah, absolutely. I do apologise.
He's new to broadcasting. He's new to broadcasting.
Yes, exactly.
You can't swear.
Sorry. Anyway, he wrote back and said, not a chance. But then he wrote in the second post, we had a second post in those days, and said, well, actually come in for a 20-minute chat. And I did. And he offered me a full-time job, basically a 3-year apprenticeship, working for local papers. So I took it up. So I never went back to school, never went to uni. And I've been a working reporter since I was 16.
So see, we are very. I did do A-levels, and I did exactly the same thing, joined a local paper. I wondered how has it changed? And all that time you were on papers, then radio, and then obviously famously This Morning, and everything you've done since.
Yeah.
Is it harder covering politics now? Trying to get answers out, I don't know whether it's union leaders or politicians.
Well, that's a good question. I think I wouldn't say harder. I'd say you need different skills now. The political establishment, and that includes the trade union establishment, have become extremely good at what Matt Hancock admitted when he was in the jungle 2 or 3 weeks ago, at pivoting. They're very, very good at moving off the point, at giving you an answer to a question that you haven't actually asked. That happens a lot. And also, because most of what I do is in the live realm, just as you do, they know that they only have to fill time and tap dance for a certain amount of time, and then they'll be in safe territory. The interview will have run out of time. So they're very good at stalling, at equivocating, and as I say, giving you the answers to questions you haven't asked. And so that gradually over the years has required a different skill approach. And what they're very good at doing, and this is what he did yesterday, what Mr. Lynch did yesterday, is when you interrupt them because they've said something which absolutely needs challenging, which is what happened yesterday morning, they'll accuse you in kind of almost in injured, wounded terms of interrupting them, and they just want to finish their answer. But they're not giving you the answer to the question you ask, so you have to interrupt them. So that sets you up with the viewer possibly as somebody who's bullying them or talking across them. But you're not. As I said to him yesterday, all I wanted to hear was his voice. I'm not interested in the sound of my voice. I just wanted to hear his voice answering the questions that were put to him. And you have to hold true to that. And I'm sure you're the same in your interviews, Matt. You have to hold them to account.
Is there any particular politician or political interview you particularly enjoyed doing over the years?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, actually, Margaret Thatcher. A long time ago, she wrote, after she'd been kicked out, she licked her wounds for 2 or 3 years, and then she wrote a slightly boring autobiography. Well, it was, it wasn't a thriller.
It is quite dull, yeah.
Yeah. But yes, interviewed her for this morning, and she was surprisingly open and warm. I mean, it didn't make headlines as an interview, but it was a very, very interesting conversation. And because she had actually, I think she felt she had nothing left to prove, she was quite relaxed. So I remember that as an interesting interview. The Bill Clinton interview was interesting, but the best was Hillary Clinton, actually, the year before that. She'd written her autobiography, and she was very open about the Monica Lewinsky affair, what it was like to be a woman, attempting at that point to get into the political arena, because at that point she was simply the First Lady ex. So that was a very interesting interview.
And you mentioned how it doesn't take much for you to trend on Twitter these days. Why do you think that is? And let's be honest, quite often either Richard Madeley trends or Alan Partridge trends.
Yeah,
how do you feel about being viewed as a real-life Alan Partridge?
Oh, I couldn't give a stuff. Honestly, I mean, no. I mean, the secret, I think, of enjoying this job, and I only do it, to be honest with you, at my great age, because I still enjoy doing it. One of the tricks is, well, it's not a trick. It's not to take yourself remotely seriously. If you do that, then you're screwed. You'll be looking at Twitter every day. You'll be looking at what used to be the kind of the sharper edge of the newspaper columnists every day, and you'll be fretting about what's being said about you, and you mustn't. I mean, the Alan Partridge thing is quite funny, actually. And what I find is quite often things that I've never actually said are put into Richard Madeley quotes and then compared to a Partridgeism. But I don't mind at all. I mean, I just get on with my job, and it's never had any impact on the jobs I'm asked to do, or interviews I'm asked to do, or articles I'm asked to write as a journalist. So it doesn't affect my real world, because I don't let it, because it doesn't matter. It's a joke. It's fun.
It's quite funny. Richard, you very kindly agreed that you're going to have a go at our quiz. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but I'll give it a whirl. I like quizzes.
Perfect. Here we go then. It's time for our hugely popular quiz, Can You Get to Number 10? So there's 10 questions loosely connected to 10 cabinet jobs. The more questions you get right, the better the job you get, taking your place alongside our listeners and guests. If you make it all the way to number 10 and get that right, you'll cross the threshold to become our show's Prime Minister. It's as easy as that, Richard.
Okay, lay it on me.
So in fact, Lorraine Kelly is currently Environment Secretary in our cabinet. So it feels like there's a good GMB versus Lorraine battle.
The kindest person in television. Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, so here we go. Question number 1 then, on Can You Get to Number 10? Question number 1, to become Minister without portfolio, complete this well-known phrase, Elvis has left the...
building.
Is the correct answer. Question number 2, for digital culture, media and sports. The sequel to the 2009 blockbuster film Avatar is out in cinemas, but who directed it?
No idea.
Is it? Good. Is it James Cameron or Stanley Kubrick?
It can't be Kubrick. Got to be Cameron, surely.
Is the correct answer.
Yeah.
Question number 3 for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. What is the alcoholic element of a pina colada?
Are you going to give me options, or I'll just have to go for it?
Is it vodka or rum?
Well, I see. It's pina colada. It's a vodka, isn't it?
No. No.
Oh.
There's your old mate Maggie.
Very good.
The correct answer is rum. So you did. That was the question. That if you'd have got that right, you might have bumped Lorraine off. But you've only made it to Culture Secretary.
Oh, well, that'll do. It's a humble start. I'll work my way up from there.
But I don't want to rub the point in, but Lorraine Kelly did better than you.
It's all right. Thank you. You said that twice.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on. It's brilliant to have a chat with you. And happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas to you as well. Have a great one.
Lovely stuff. That was Richard Madeley on Times Radio. It's only a matter of time, innit? It's only a matter of time. Just to remind you of the exciting news that this time tomorrow, never mind turning on the Oxford Street lights, never mind lighting up the Eiffel Tower, or whatever else it is you do at Christmas, we are going to be turning on the Times Radio Christmas music. Yes. It's a little bit of it. Mariella and I, very much the local radio DJs, will be dusting off the roadshow unit, parking it up outside Debenhams with a big plunger. And we're going to